Welcome everyone to another episode of Project Podcast presented by Project Insulin. Today we have Pat and Patrick Sabatino, father and son duo. Both have type 1 diabetes, got it at very different stages in their life. But I'll let them start by introducing themselves. Pat, you go first, and then Patrick follow up.
Sure. Hi, I'm Pat Sabatino. I'm a type 1, what people often call type 1 LADA diabetic in my late 50s in Narragansett, Rhode Island.
I am Patrick, and I am classic juvenile type 1 diabetes. Uh, yeah.
You guys got to give me a little bit more information about yourself. Pat, what do you do? Patrick, what do you do? Where are you in your life process?
Sure. I work for RyHub in Providence. I'm part of the startup ecosystem, helping people, entrepreneurs who have an idea for a high growth startup, get from idea to funding and beyond. I have lived in Rhode Island since 2003, married, two kids, have a wonderful wife from Poland, have a daughter at the University of Michigan, and this knucklehead over here who's a senior in high school, but I'll let him talk about himself.
Yeah, so I'm a rising senior in high school. I go to Narragansett High School. I'm looking at colleges right now, finishing up, like poking around different places, see what I'm interested in. I'm thinking probably something computer science related, and I'm taking a lot of cool courses at my high school to help down that path.
And you leave out some of the best stuff.
Oh,
You're a competitive athlete in two sports living with type 1 diabetes.
that is true. I do go through a lot of juice boxes in my day because I have a lot of lows during exercise. I make it through just fine.
Tell them what sport you do.
I'm a hockey player and I'm also a competitive fencer. I have to get up pretty early and go to bed pretty late, but I make it work.
That's very cool. That's good to know because I didn't know that you did play two sports. So that's something new that I now know. Pat and I met at RyHub actually. RyHub is the space that I've been working out of in Rhode Island for the past 2 years, and they've let me stay there and work as I've been growing Project Insulin. I have a group of mentors at a RyHub, and I wasn't planning on doing a full RyHub plug, but they deserve it. And now is actually a perfect timing because I'm moving to Boston on Monday. I literally am living in a shell of a house right now. This interview is being done on a couch rather than at a table where it's normally done. And that is because I'm moving. A perfect fitting end to my time in Rhode Island is wrapping it up with someone from RyHub who has helped Project Insulin already and as we move forward. So Pat, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about your diabetes origin story. You mentioned your LADA, which means that you got it not as a juvenile, but as an adult, which is a little later in life compared to the normal storylines that we've heard on this podcast and just generally. So tell us a little bit about what that was like, when it happened, relative, like how long have you had diabetes, and I'm going to unmute you.
Sure. I can remember even when I was a young child, my dad's Uncle Jimmy had type 1 diabetes, my dad on my mother's side. And he had gotten it as an adult. And at that time, they thought it was just a type 2 diabetic who would become insulin dependent. They didn't really have as much diagnosis skills or tools back in the 1970s and 80s for those types of things. And then in the probably it was 1985, 84, 85, my father came down with diabetes. And by then, they initially thought it was type 2, but it was really type 1. And he got it at the age of 39. No, apologies. He got it at the age of 41. And then when I turned 39, got it. And they thought initially it was type 2. And I said, you guys might want to check on this. But at that point, it had been something that had been in my family for a couple of generations now. So I had an idea what I was getting into. And ironically, I had gone to Joslin Center when I first got diagnosed, and they had an experimental study going on. It was an iron imaging study where they made you drink a drink that had iron in it. And they give you all the disclaimers. You could get iron poisoning, you could die, you could do all these things. But what it did is the iron stained your pancreas. And then you could do an MRI and you could check the inflammation in the pancreas, and they could see the actual destruction going on of the beta cells, the insulin producing cells in the pancreas. and they had me do this iron drink and MRI. I believe it was 3 different times, and they could actually see the progression. I actually remember this kind of weird moment where I was laying on the MRI table and they're looking at the imaging, and I could hear one of the technicians talking to one of the doctors going, "Oh, yeah, look at that. It's in full attack right now." And I'm thinking, these guys are just being really candid about the destruction of my beta cells. But it was a bit of a bummer, and it was a really tough thing for me because I consider myself a relatively tough guy who has only one phobia in the entire world, and that phobia happened to be of needles. My entire life, every time my mother had to take me to the doctor, I was literally a kid kicking up a fuss in the hallway of the doctor's office, being dragged by the arms, kicking and screaming down the hallway. I don't want a shot. I don't want a shot, making a huge drama. So when I come down with type 1 and I had to start using insulin pens to inject myself, I was literally shaking, and my wife had to literally help me get over that moment. This is pre-insulin pump. So yeah, it was that was my journey. Of course, after I was diagnosed, my sister also came down with type 1 Lotta. And then we had an unexpected moment.
That's when I got diagnosed, because I was not type 1 Lotta. I got it in fifth grade, so I believe I was
You were 11 at the
11.
time, yeah.
And I didn't really think anything of it at first. I just started feeling a little more tired than usual, but I didn't really think anything. I was eating a lot more, but I thought, oh, it's probably just a growth spurt. But I did use the bathroom a lot. I'd be waking up in the middle of the night, and I was like, that's weird. And I believe it was mom.
It was mom.
She picked up on it and was like, hey, test his blood sugar. And since he was a diabetic, he had a meter lying around, and we checked it, and it was pretty high.
You were
So
410.
yeah, we went to
Hasbro?
yeah, no, we went to the pediatric.
Went to the
office,
pediatrician first, right?
and we walked in, and I have a core memory of him telling me, "Oh, there's no way you have ketones." And then probably 2 minutes later, the doctor walks in and is like, "You have ketones." So, oh,
Yeah, it was. I have to admit, um, of all of those moments, there are a couple things that stood out for me. One, the way he reacted to it, because diabetes had always been part of his household. Dad had it, and Eric, you and I talked about this, but for the benefit of the podcast, we had a very different journey as a family because so many families, when they get the first person in the family gets diagnosed, there's this immediate onset of fear and panic of the unknown, of the dangers, of all of those things. And not only was I not, I was upset that he had it, I was bothered that he had it, but maybe in some ways even felt responsible for him having it. But I wasn't afraid of it because I knew what he was getting into. And ironically, he was really accepting of it. He was like, "Oh, I got to do the things dad has to do now."
I didn't really view it as that big of a problem because I had already seen like my dad living a successful life with it for like years. So I just thought, oh, it's another thing. It's like brushing my teeth. It's just another thing I have to do now. It's no big deal.
And that's such an interesting just first of all, Pat, your story, because you had family members who had it. I want to go back there before we talk about your two dynamic with Patrick's diagnosis. But what was it like for you, Pat, as an adult with family members who have had it, but still 39, you're old enough that like you're set in your ways and needles aside, like this was a big shift for you, right?
Because, like I said, at first they thought it was type 2, and they were trying to limit my diet and do things that would try to help it be controlled that way. And that was partially the right way to deal with it. Was as a type 1 Lotta, my honeymoon period lasted over a year. It was a real long, slow decline. And on one hand, like the limiting of eating carbs and all of these things, trying to treat myself like a type 2, frankly, was quite miserable. But the when I started on insulin, and back in the day of pens, we're talking about I had to take 2 long-acting shots a day plus a fast-acting shot every time I ate and needed a correction. So all of a sudden, I was facing like 8 shots a day of insulin, which was just absolutely horrifying. And that frightened me more than the actual prospect of having diabetes. And then you get into that second wave of, oh, diabetics have at that time, and we're not talking about the era with CGMs or insulin pumps. So when you were only checking your sugar by pricking your finger whatever times a day, which also sucked. But because you didn't have as good a control, things like blindness and amputation and kidney disease all contributed to having a 10-year shorter life expectancy than a non-diabetic person. Now, the numbers have improved because we have better therapeutics. These pumps and CGMs are absolutely amazing. But yeah, like the idea of the why me thing was, why did I get unlucky on this one was a big deal.
Yeah, and I was wondering, you mentioned when Patrick got diagnosed, you felt responsible for it. I wanted to have you come into that a little bit more. Tell us a little bit. I know it ran in your family, right? You shared the history, but like, why did you feel specifically responsible for him getting diagnosed?
So it's weird. I don't know if responsible is the correct word, but let's talk about that for a minute. So Patrick is the youngest of my two children. I have a daughter who's older than him by 2 years, 2.5 years. So immediately, the wave of thoughts, the first thing is let's give all credit to my wife. I felt stupid because she saw all the symptoms in him and I'm the diabetic. I should have recognized them. But my wife was literally the one who said, he's urinating a lot at night. She saw everything. We should check his sugar. And I sat there, no, he doesn't, not a, no. And I should have been the first. So I honestly, and to this day, tell people all the time, I feel a bit embarrassed that I could not pick up on things I should have easily recognized as the obvious signs. And yet my wife was all over it. So she had that third person perspective of a diabetic that I didn't have being on the inside. So first, all credit to her for that because she really recognized it. And by the way, a crazy side story on this: we he wound up going to the pediatrician and then straight to Hasbro, and it was the day before a blizzard.
Yeah.
We had one of those old school New England 22-inch sideways blowing snow blizzards coming. Might have been Winter Storm Nemo or whatever one we had 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But we got the Hasbro, and Hasbro had said, usually we want to admit a newly diagnosed diabetic, but given the storm and the fact that your household clearly has all the supplies to check blood sugar and knows how to deal with diabetes, let him go home. Let him stay with you. We need the hospital room. Let him go outside and play in the snow, and we'll bring him back, right after the storm, which I thought was kind of a benefit. But
Did they ever bring me back?
yeah, you did go back.
Okay.
You didn't get admitted, but you went back for day visits. But anyway, the second part of it though is the genetic side, right? So the genetic side for type 1 diabetes has always been a bit of a ghost. We know there's something there. Not everyone gets it. I immediately thought, even though he's a more traditional type 1 than my family, which are all Ladas, there's got to be a connection. It's too much of a coincidence. And that's my genes that are probably to blame. There's no history of diabetes whatsoever on my wife's side. And as we know, you don't have to have history of diabetes to get diabetes, but I felt like this was a big piece of it. And I immediately started fearing for my daughter. Is she a ticking time bomb? Is she the next shoe to drop? And I lived in fear with that for a long time. I even checked her sugar every now and then. It was something that hung over me.
My personal thing on that was when he was checking everyone's sugar. I remember when I was younger, before I was diabetic, sometimes I would ask to check my sugar and he wouldn't let me. And he would also make pictures of Crystal Light and he wouldn't let me drink them because he was like, "Oh, the artificial sweeteners, you can't have it." So I actually remember the very first thing I did when I got home from Hasbro was I had a big glass of Crystal Light because I always wanted to drink it and he would never let me have it.
He's drinking from Dad's pitcher in the fridge. Yeah.
And Patrick, I we don't know each other. We're just introducing ourselves, but you just seem very chill about the whole diabetes thing. You just kind of, yeah, dad had it, family members have it. I just kind of I got it, and yeah, now it's just another thing I do. I'm curious, like, where does that mentality come from? Just so relaxed.
I want to say I've always had a very roll with the punches attitude, but I've seen him live with it for years. And then I also went to this camp for diabetics, Camp Surefire, like very soon after getting diagnosed. So basically all the stress of diabetes was gone after I went there. I went there and I saw kids all ages, like younger than me, older than me, all these different kids, and they were all like smiles on their face, all of them happy, not a single person worried about diabetes. And I was thinking to myself, if all of these kids are fine and happy, then I totally can be too. And basically all the stress of what am I going to do, it was all gone after that.
To be fair, also though, it's an astute observation, Eric, because I can actually remember a day last year when he was sitting with all his fencing teammates and they were talking about each other, and one of them literally looked at Patrick and said, "Yeah, but Patrick's like the most chill dude I know." And like all the fencers are like, "Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, I don't think I know anyone anywhere near as chill as Patrick." It was literally that choice of wording. They were all like, "Yeah, he's also, to be fair,
Pretty relaxed.
he's pretty chill."
So for you, the camp was a big, and I was going to get to this later, but we're already here now. So camp was a very big part for you. So I want you to go back before you got to camp. Tell me what the feelings were, if you remember them. I know 11, 6, 7 years ago now, but what was it like right before camp? And then take me through that first summer at camp. What did you learn? What were you most appreciative of? What was it like getting to do that for the first time? I want to like, the idea of listening to an album for the first time that only happens once. So like that experience, I'm trying to get that so people can understand whether it's for their kids, for themselves, to just understand the value of going to a diabetes camp, going to a camp like Camp Surefire, which is in Rhode Island, but there are many all across the country. So yeah, Patrick, I want you to go into that for
So at the very start, back when we're gonna go way back to when I was in Hasbro Hospital. It didn't feel real at first. I was like sitting there, and the whole memory. I know I was there for hours, but it really felt like 5 minutes. It really felt like the doctor came in, gave me an IV, and then took the IV out, gave me some like fancy insulin, and left. And that felt like the whole memory. But it felt really dragged out once I had come home from the hospital. I had to go to all these meetings at school. I had to meet with my nurse. I was in the building, but I couldn't go to my classes because I was like talking to all my teachers, explaining everything that was happening. But they did let me go to recess, and that was wonderful. But the one thing I remember at recess is we were fifth graders. We played some interesting games. One of them was it was tag, but the tagger, as brutal as fifth graders are, we would usually pick the fattest kid on the playground and say, "Oh, he has diabetes," and everyone would run away. And if you got tagged, you were the diabetic, and you had to go tag someone. So when I had first come back to the playground, all my friends were like, "Hi," they all came over, hugged me, all that kind of stuff. And then they asked me if I wanted to play, and I was like, "Guys, crazy story. You should let me be the diabetic this time because I have diabetes." And they were like, completely shocked.
No, they didn't believe you at first.
Yeah, they honestly thought I was kidding because I was a jokester. But it took them a while to realize, wait, he's serious. And thankfully, they didn't treat me any differently after that. That's thank you to all my friends. But it was definitely weird because that it became part of my identity after that. Like now I am a diabetic. That's just something people know about me. And that's part of the reason why I think camp is such a great place to be is you're not different at camp. You are like the same. Everyone is it's normal at camp. And it's also a really great experience because when I was like at my house, no disrespect to you, but you and mom were all over my blood sugar constantly. If anything changed, you guys would be all over me about
No
it.
worse
So
than I was all over mine.
mom was
Mom,
very
mom.
she's good.
She's a good mom.
Yeah, she made sure my sugar was perfect at all times. And the thing about camp is they make sure your sugar is perfect at all times, but they have a lot of experience doing it. So they're not overbearing at all. Like when I was at camp, I felt like I was eating normally. I felt like I was having a great time. I was running around, having all these crazy fun activities. Camp Surefire, off topic, fits so many activities into 1 week. It is crazy. It feels like every day is 40 hours at least. It's so much fun packed into one day. But I was doing all of that in a day and I didn't feel any different than before I had diabetes. My sugar was perfect the whole time. All the counselors were great. All the food was great. It was like the cabins, the kids. It all just felt. It almost felt like I wasn't even diabetic. It felt just like normal life.
You're just at a camp.
Yeah, it just flowed so smoothly that there was like it felt like there was nothing even going on the whole time. It
But
felt like it was just so seamless.
but that's one of the great things also about Camp Surefire when you do the diabetes education, you guys do your carb counting and insulin dosing, and you're around the campfire, and you're doing the s'mores. There's nothing unique about you there as much as diabetes is concerned. Every single other kid there
Is diabetic.
it has every single experience that you have.
Mhm.
And there's no everything's just out in the open. Like people just change their pumps. They're just no one's
Mhm.
hiding anything. It's just a very
It's very open.
yeah.
It's like a total safe space.
Yeah, and that's really cool. Sounds like a very unique opportunity. The explaining it like not having it's like you're at a diabetes camp, but everyone has diabetes, so it's you're just at camp. It's like one, yeah, what is it? 2x over 2x is just x over x, right? Like it's like that. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, while we're here, we would both be absolutely remiss if we did not take a moment and call out Dr. Greg Fox and his wife Allie and all the amazing stuff they do running the nonprofit that creates Camp Surefire, which is a tireless year-round effort of fundraising and planning and organization and getting all these medical staff in and all the different whether it's karate or you did fencing one
Yeah.
year or we did whatever you did there. It is a tireless effort that they have been doing. They took over the reins from someone who founded Camp Surefire and well later had gotten on in age and retired, and it still exists today thanks to the Fox family. So we have to give amazing shout outs and kudos to the Fox family.
And they do such an amazing job too. I honestly, the great thing about camp is every year you come back more mature and you notice like more of what's actually going on. And every year that you come back, you just realize like it's a much better place than you thought it was last year.
And some of you actually, like you,
Yeah,
moved from being
campers
campers.
to
Now
counselors.
he's
Yeah.
a counselor helping the younger campers.
Mhm.
And this isn't an ad for Camp Surefire, but I'm glad this is what you guys are passionate about. So this is what we're going to talk about. Patrick, with regards to the transition from being a camper to a counselor, what has that been like for you? And how do you teach the younger campers? What do you tell them? What is your advice? How do you like, you only have a week, right? And I know you said that every day feels like it's jam packed and you get so much done. But yeah, what is that like to be go from like there to have fun to yeah, you're still there to have fun, but you're also like a mentor. And how do you like what is different about that version of camp?
It's really a unique experience. When I started as a camper, I looked up to the counselors because they were the coolest people. I mean, they were out there doing all these crazy activities, being involved with all this super fun stuff. And a lot of the counselors, I believe almost all of them, are all diabetic. So it was like I idolized them basically. They were like shining stars to me. And as I got older, I realized like how much they all do for stuff. The med staff there help all the campers bolus, all the cooking staff, they write down all the carbs on a whiteboard to make it really easy for you to calculate how much you're going to eat in every meal. It's perfect. And when you're like a kid, a camper at camp, if you go low, the counselors are always there. They keep track of all your sugars at all times. If you go low, they'll come right over with a juice box and pick you right back up. But now that I'm a counselor, it's a great experience to come full circle. Um, but it is quite interesting to be in a cabin at 3 in the morning and someone goes low and you have to wake them up and
Some 7-year-old.
yeah, this 7 year olds. No, I don't want a juice box, and you have to help them. You have to help them realize you need the juice box. Thankfully, camp has these diabetes education programs, both for the psychological impact, but also just how to care for your diabetes, because some of the kids there don't know that. But as you get older, you also learn more. Like when you're a younger camper, you learn like very basic, like how to live with diabetes. And as you get older, we go more in depth. You understand a lot more about it. I feel like most of my knowledge of diabetes actually came from these diabetes education sessions at camp, because in the hospital, when they explain it to you, they use a lot of big words for a young kid, and at camp they make it very easy to understand. So
Yeah,
it's a big
yeah.
help.
The practitioners need to help dumb it down for the kids, and I'd like to think I helped educate you just
Yeah,
a little,
a
a
smidge
tiny
maybe.
bit.
But yeah, it's great. And now that I'm a counselor too, it's my job to help these kids. So if someone's refusing to have a juice box, or if they don't want to correct their blood sugar or something like that, it's partly my job to help explain to them like why they need to do this and why it's important for them to take care of their diabetes, because a lot of these kids just think, oh, it's something I have, but I'm just going to go about my life because it's not going to kill me immediately, so I can go have fun. It's really hard for some of these kids to understand long term why you should manage your diabetes, and I feel like as counselors it's very important that we help them understand that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, just a very interesting look into what camp is like, what camp life is like. I wanted to go back because you mentioned this on the side about part of your diagnosis or your entry back into school with the tag and having the tagger be the diabetic. It sounds like there was stigma about diabetes at school as fifth graders. That's like to think that young, there's already a stigma around this. So I'm gonna pry a little bit and I'm gonna ask. So what was it like? Did you have to? Was there a piece? Maybe Pat, you know this, and Patrick might not remember. Was there like a little bit of a transition period here where there was a little bit of teasing, or like there was some education that needed to happen with your classmates? Hold on, let me unmute you. But yeah, yeah, was like walk me through that because I think there's more here that you're glossing over.
Before that, for just a second, I'm going to preempt him and go jump before it for a second. I can actually remember before he was diagnosed that they were doing this, and I was saying to him, "That's just not cool. You have a dad who's a diabetic." And he was like, "Yeah, I know. It's really this kid and that kid. I'm not going to name kids' names." And I'm just going along with it. But I remember before he got diagnosed talking about this. I don't know if you remember that conversation.
I don't remember it, but I'm sure it happened. I will say, once everybody found out that I had diabetes, the diabetes tag game stopped immediately. So it was like just like a generalization. Most kids, especially who don't understand it, just assume if you're diabetic, you're fat, and
That's not the nicest way to phrase it, but
yeah, that's how the kids thought of it.
we're being in the mind of a fifth grader.
In the 11-year-old brain, diabetes equals fat, which is not how it works, but they didn't understand that. And later on, I had to do certain presentations in school, and I picked diabetes as my topic to help my classmates learn a little bit. But it definitely, at least before I was diagnosed, there was stigma. There was like negative, I don't want to say negative energy, but people definitely didn't think highly towards diabetes or a diabetic person. And then once, I don't want to say I was the reason for this, but when they watched me get diabetes, they were, huh, he's not really different from us, so maybe we should stop doing this. And they did, thankfully. But
Interestingly, too, what's really interesting, Narragansett is the second smallest school district in Rhode Island behind Block Island. It's a very small school district.
tiny.
Yeah, about 100 kids a grade. It wasn't like you were in one of the Providence public schools where there were probably 12 diabetics in the school. For most of the time you were in school, the only other diabetic that was in school with you happened to be a girl that was a friend of your sister's 2 years ahead of you.
Yeah, there was also Jack, but there was,
Oh, yeah.
in the entire school when I was in fifth grade, there there was me, and there was also two seventh graders who were also diabetic, and that was it.
Yeah.
For the entire school. It was definitely interesting, especially because at that age there isn't really too much interaction across grades. I had actually talked to my sister's friend, one of the seventh graders who had diabetes, and there was nothing like that tag game going on in their grade at all. It was much more respectful. Maybe they were just older and more mature, or maybe they understood it a little better. But it definitely felt like at that age, people didn't really understand unless they had someone in their life who was diabetic so
Right.
that they would know.
Small school district, 3 kids in the whole district. It didn't really get the same. It didn't get the same familiarity that maybe a larger district might have had.
Yeah, and it's Patrick, you bring up the difference between the 7th graders in your class, the 5th graders, but also it's like people don't know about diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, they don't understand it. There's these misconceptions, and until it enters your life, the misconceptions is all you know. It makes sense that once you were diagnosed, the class had a frame of reference and stopped doing it as well. But it's just very interesting to hear that that's a very salient example of not understanding what diabetes is. And then for it to happen to be like your class and then you get diabetes, it's just a very interesting thing to bring up. And Pat, I didn't even think about the fact that you're the dad who has diabetes and they're playing this game. So yeah. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting. And so Pat, this one's for you. So your son has diabetes. He's 11, and over the next 6 years, he's going to camp, whether it be as a camper or as a counselor. We've heard from Patrick what it was like and how it's helped him. But you're not a third party, but you have a different viewpoint of this. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how you've seen him grow over the years, whether it's from camp or otherwise, and how he's grown to take care of his diabetes himself and yeah, just curious from the father's perspective, a little bit more bird's eye view.
Yeah, and I hope at this moment anyone who has a young child with diabetes listens carefully. It gets better. It gets easier. When we started out, again, it was before CGMs and stuff. I'd go to bed at night because when you're first diagnosed, and especially when you're that young, sugars are all over the place and there's highs and lows. And I would get up, my wife and I, for a couple of months, got up because he was a little out of control blood sugar wise early on. And we'd get up in the middle of the night, take turns pricking his finger while he was asleep to check his sugar because we were really worried about him going critically low while he was asleep. And that's a frightening personal experience as a diabetic to think about those things. It's a whole next level fear when it's your young child, right? I'm Patrick the fourth, he's Patrick the fifth. I'm responsible for this one in all ways, but it was really hard there. And then from there, we went to a family dinner time, talking about carbs on the plate and what has fast, highly glycemic carbs and low glycemic carbs. And then we even do this still now.
Yeah,
How many carbs do you think are on that plate?
back and forth and try to guess who's more accurate.
And it's funny, it used to be that it was more educational in the beginning and trying to get him to, all right, it's 7 ounces of pasta, trying to get him to learn. But it's come to a point now where he's great. When he first went over to a friend's house without us, we would worry. We'd have to give the parents the phone number. We'd want him to call us and tell us what he was eating so we could say how much insulin he should have. And then he started doing better with this stuff on his own. And of course, having the CGM and being able to watch it on the phone then gave us a whole other level of security so we could call the parents if we could see trouble coming. And of course, the first time he went over to a friend's house and he had a CGM, my wife and I every 10 minutes are like looking at the phone, what's his sugar? What's his sugar? But he's at a point now, he's been driving for, now a year and 2 days.
Yeah,
And he has a job, works at a local seafood restaurant here in Narragansett. And he goes where he goes and he eats food where he eats and he hits McDonald's sometimes late in the night and just he doses and does it all on his own. And this has given me a great amount of comfort knowing that in 11 and a half months or whatever it's going to be when he goes off to college, that I know he knows now how to take care of himself and his diabetes and he's self-managing. He changes his own pump. He does all his own things. I'm still gonna have to buy all of that stuff. And there's a whole other side conversation. We all know how expensive it is to have diabetes. You have two diabetics in the house. I forget we spend $6,000-7,000 a year between insulin pump supplies, CGM supplies, two sets of insulin, any type of backup stuff like ketone strips and glucose tablets and We could go through the backup pens in case your pump fails and all the stuff there. Both of our pumps are now 6 years old, and they're out of warranty at 5 years old. At some point, we need two new pumps. And those are, even after insurance, we have to pay about 1,000 a piece out of pocket for those. There's a whole impact on the household about having 50% of the household being diabetic. That's a major tax on a household.
I will say I've also seen it at camp. There are a lot of people who do struggle to afford insulin, the pump supplies. Pumps and CGMs are amazing things to have, but they're not cheap and not all people can afford them.
Mhm.
So it is really unfortunate.
Or
to
the
see.
CGM they afford is a not, what's the right way to say it? It's not as sophisticated as some other models, doesn't have all the same features, doesn't integrate perfectly with the pumps.
Yeah.
Some people have to clearly make do. And the work that you do at Project Insulin and trying to, bring insulin to those that need it, as well as other organizations that are helping defer these costs, it's really yeoman's work and well needed. I'm fortunate that we can afford our supplies and we have really good insurance. I currently, with our current insurance plan, I pay $2 a month for each of our insurance. That is rare, but that is when you have the platinum level insurance from the local insurance provider and not the silver tier that most people have. Cost is definitely a factor. And by the way, we're paying that much with the best insurance out there. So
I do remember hearing certain people at camp talk about insulin costs. And camp really, it's a great place because kids open up and they feel very comfortable sharing all these kind of things. But there were definitely times I remember kids, I was shocked. Some kids pay just for having one diabetic in their family, just them, like upwards of 40, 50, $60,000 a year just to afford their supplies, which
that sounds high, but
there are some kids who have brittle diabetes.
yeah,
stuff
brittle
so like
diabetes is a nasty.
young kids, if they break their pump constantly, like doing activities, they have to replace things all the time. Some kids are spending thousands of dollars for one person having diabetes. It's very expensive.
It is.
Yeah, yeah. We don't always bring up Project Insulin when I do the podcast. I try to keep it as neutral as possible. But yeah, the average person spends close to $5,000-6,000 a year on diabetes and I'm sorry, on insulin specifically. And that's a lot. That's 20% of the average or the median take-home income in the US. Median take-home income is like 36. You're spending 5 to 6 of that just on insulin. That doesn't include what you pay for taxes, doesn't include your rent, doesn't include your food, doesn't include all these other things. And yeah, we totally agree that insulin is too expensive, and diabetes in general is just a very expensive disease because you have so many different things all the time. And earlier, Pat, when you were breaking down the costs, I was like, oh, there's two of you. It should be a buy one, get one type of deal, but it's not how it works in the medical world, is it? Hold on.
Yeah, no. And first of all, was that your pump that just beeped?
I think it was.
Being real world diabetics, we just want to check the pump because this is the real world. Yeah, you're good. You're cool.
Yeah.
The other part of this is, and it just needs to be called out. I'm sure most of the people who listen to this podcast get it. There's that medical difference between type 1 and type 2, right? And a lot of the type 2 diabetics, they skimp and they cut corners, and it costs them years on the end of their life for not managing it well, but they try to manage the costs in the present. Type 1, you don't have, like I remember when I was younger, I would have these like weird dreams every now and then. I would think about what would happen if I got shipwrecked on a deserted island alone or with this person or with whatever, right? Now I don't, every time I think about that, I'd be dead in 3 days without insulin if I was shipwrecked there. So, or whatever, how many days it is. It's the type 1 situation is not one where, economizing, it's so much more severe. You don't have, you don't really have a choice. You need insulin to live. And you need to constantly, like every time we go on a trip, we pack all the extra pump supplies, all the extra CGM supplies. We pack enough insulin. I have my own, as I get older, I have my own suite of pills that I take for diabetes in older age, with the hypertension that is common amongst diabetics and all those related non-insulin related costs that go into it, right? My statin drug and all those different things. I take metformin now because I'm developing insulin resistance as I get older in life. There's just a lot of cost, a lot of planning, and it's not optional.
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. And yeah, you don't get a choice with regards to whether you want to take your insulin or take care of your body. I could take the vitamin D pill today and miss it tomorrow, and that's totally okay. Can't really do that when you have diabetes. That's not a luxury that you can afford. But I wanted to end on a bit of a lighter note. Patrick, I'm coming back to you now. You are a two-sport athlete. And so I wanted you to walk us through a bit of what it's like with diabetes and being a two-sport athlete. We've had college athletes talk to us about their experiences, about having to miss games or getting pulled partway through a game. So they get benched for 10 minutes as they eat some sugar, take some insulin, and then come back out there. I was curious if you could share a few stories that you might have, and what is that like push pull with athlete Patrick and diabetes Patrick? Pat's, I asked the right question here. That's what it looks like.
Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So when it first started, I was not as aware of my sugars because I'm very good with it now. I can feel when my blood sugar goes low, so that's like my tell is, oh, I feel it. I need to go have a juice. So if I'm on the ice, I'll skate over to the bench. My coach knows what it is. Or if I'm fencing, I can tell the referee and I'll have a juice box or some Skittles or something. But before that, it was all through the CGM, and my dad would be keeping
Well,
track of my sugar.
even before that, let's start at the beginning. I used to wave you over every 20 minutes off ice to prick your finger
Yeah,
and check your blood before we had the CGM. Do you remember that?
I do. That was
But then we got the CGMs,
CGM was
and
life
that's where you're
changing.
going right now with this story.
Yeah, the CGM was life changing, especially for sports, because I didn't have to keep pricking my finger. Obviously, I don't have my phone on me when I'm playing sports, so I can't just be like, hold up, let me just check my sugar. But my dad would keep track of it, and if my sugar was low, he would wave to me or my coach, and he would do this to basically say, "You need a juice box." So I would skate over to the bench
So
and
when I yeah, when he was younger, I used to wave the juice box at him, and he would come over to the door, and I would give it to him. Then as he got older, he would take, we call it the snack bag. It's a little bag, and he's got some diabetes supplies and glucose tabs and juice boxes, and he takes it with him on the bench for hockey and for high school hockey, or he keeps it with him in his strip bag when he's fencing. And instead of me waving the juice box and he needs to come over and grab the juice box, if he sees dad just doing this, he just goes over to his own bag and takes care of it.
And the nice thing about both hockey and fencing is it's pretty normal for athletes to eat during those sports. If you are a hockey player, I'm sure you've noticed in between the second and third period, the Zamboni goes out, resurfaces the ice, and everyone's in the locker room. Coach is giving his talk, and you'll be in there. People have their Gatorade shoes, they have their water bottles, they have all their whatever they're trying to have, and I'll sit down in there and I'll have a couple of Skittles or I'll have a juice box to bring my sugar back up for the last period. Or with fencing, between the first set of bouts and the second set, everyone goes back to their bag and pulls out like a banana or something. So it's great for me because I fit right in. It's just, oh, another person eating food between their activities. Nothing out of the ordinary.
Now, it's interesting. Some of your coaches get it, and some of your coaches needed to be educated,
Yeah,
but all of them have been good about it. Even the ones who didn't know how to deal with it would say to you, "Tell me what we need to do."
yeah.
So,
I'm very fortunate to have coaches who are understanding and get it. I'm sure not everyone has that experience, but thankfully, I feel if you explain it to your coach and have a mutual understanding, then communication is key and should work out just fine.
yeah, hopefully, this will continue on. Fingers crossed into college
Hopefully.
as a fencer.
Yeah, no, that's it's good to hear that you've had good coaches. Wendy was the college athlete who was on season two. This is season three, or you guys will be in season three. And Wendy was talking about how important it was to have her coaches understand and know. So she's a track slash volleyball, or no, track soccer. and she would be like taken off for 5 minutes, or sometimes her race would come up, and because it's such a small moment of time for a track race, there is like a yes or no point where she'll get ready all day, and 5 minutes before the meet, she's crashing into the no, I just can't. So I'm glad you have a bit more flexibility with your sports, that it's not as uh, slim of margins. But I learned about this recently is that even when you correct the low, it can take up to 45 minutes for you to feel back to normal. And I want to layer this question on being an athlete. So you go low, you're playing hockey, you're in a fencing bout, okay. And you go low and you correct it, but how does it feel when you're playing again? Like you're still not 100%. I'm curious if you could talk about that a little bit, and then we will wrap this baby up.
It's pretty interesting because the feeling of being low is not terribly different from the feeling of being exhausted during exercise. So there are times where I've thought that I was low when I actually was not. But it's definitely very noticeable, like for hockey, under all that gear, even though you're on ice, it gets very hot. So you start to feel like when you're low, your body will feel hotter than normal anyway. It's definitely very uncomfortable to be low during a hockey game. And thankfully there you can sit on the bench and it's pretty cool in an ice rink, so you can cool off pretty quick. But for fencing, it's very different. Under, I think it's 4 layers that you wear when you fence, it's very hot. And the other thing is your hands get pretty shaky sometimes, especially if your sugar is very low, which I've started to notice because there's a lot of precision for how you aim your weapon in fencing. There will be times where my like entire weapon will shake because if my arm and hand are shaking, it's much harder to control the. I'm a foil fencer, so I have to hit specifically with just the tip of the foil. It's much harder to aim when my hand is very shaky. So it's definitely, it can be pretty impactful when you're
You've
playing.
you've had bouts where you've gone low. There's one particular I'm thinking of where you lost to someone that you never lost to before and probably would never lose to again, but you just you were low
Yeah,
and you got knocked out of a tournament because we're pretty sure the low sugar just impacted his energy and his control was shaky and
it depends on how severe of a low it is, but it's definitely, in many instances you will feel much more sluggish. You'll feel like sometimes you don't want to be there. Sometimes it's just like it feels like, I don't know. I've described a serious low as feeling almost like hollow on the inside. It's a weird thing to describe, but it's
Mhm.
especially noticeable
You never
for.
told me that, by the way. I feel anxious. I feel shaky and anxious,
Well, you already feel pretty anxious if you're like if you're at a tournament or an important game.
but you're so chill.
Okay, it definitely it adds up because no one feels perfect in the middle of their exercise or in an important event or anything. But if you're low, it can really amplify that feeling, and that is when it leads to like, the feelings that already might be not great, they might get pushed towards feeling bad, and that's not where you want to be during exercise.
Thank you both for coming on. This was very interesting. You guys did it. The first duo to both have diabetes on the podcast. We've had a couple where one partner had diabetes, the other one didn't. We've had a parent without the child. We've had the child without the parent. But to have both of you on, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Before we wrap up, any last words you want to share before we head out?
Shout out to the moms. What my wife went through first with me, then with him. She's a therapist and she probably needs her own therapy group for moms of diabetics.
I have to admit I was not the most compliant child when it came to diabetes at first. I was a bit of a troublemaker. I often, sorry, but it got better. It got better.
Yeah. Thank you both for getting on. Thank you everyone for listening. If you'd like to watch more, please can subscribe to the podcast, Project Podcast presented by Project Insulin. To learn more about Project Insulin, check us out at projectinsulin.org or find us on social media. And have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time.